Great, guys. Well, I'm super excited here. We have Lauren Havens from Homehavens. She manages a relatively big portfolio of Airbnb. You know, as a private party here in the county, she's number one. And in the state, what would you say? There's
a couple of big corporate companies that are a little bit bigger, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But in terms of anyone that's not a big corporate company, you guys are probably top in the state, correct?
Biggest in Salt Lake. So
awesome. Anyway, again, I'm a little jittery and super excited to talk to Lauren. What she's been able to do with Airbnb has really changed my perspective on it. I'll go over that real quick. Long story short, based off of a lot of numbers I was running, in most cases, Airbnb was not making sense as I was comparing it to long-term rentals. But after seeing what they were able to do with their occupancy rates, it was a total game changer. So we'll jump into that and talk a little more about how they're able to get that done. But let's start off and let's hear a little bit about your story, how you guys got started and what the journey's been.
Well, you're going to love this. We're filming in Orem and my story kind of started in Orem. Perfect. So I got married. This is weird to say as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, but I do not have an entrepreneurial mind. Never have. I just like work and I like doing things. I'm more of a doer. Married my husband who's super entrepreneurial. Got married and we bought a bank-owned duplex kind of right down the street just north of UVU. Remodeled it ourselves, showered at the gym for 6 months. And we decided that we probably, if we wanted to, build a business in real estate, we probably need to move a little bit quicker than that. So we said, how do we pick up properties a little bit quicker than that? Got some partners and we bought 3 properties in St. George and they were all right next door, or right every other house next door to each other. And we said, hey, I think these would do a little bit better on Airbnb than not. And we didn't even know how to run numbers. So we just started. We said, okay, we closed on 2 properties the same day, set them up, had them listed that weekend. And then the other just a couple months later. And then we moved back up here and we managed them remotely and we learned a ton and we made a ton of mistakes. And then from there, again, we said, hey, we need to move a little bit quicker than this. And so we said, okay, if we're going to do this strategy, it's making great money, but we're not super good at it. We get calls and the toilet's clogged and we don't know how to take care of everything. So we're going to need some management help. So we tried 6 different management companies, either went all the way through to the end or actually had them start, and they weren't performing how we were. And we didn't think we were doing a good job. So we dove into that. I really fell in love with the management side of it once I started hiring staff and coordinating everything. And that's when we started managing for others. And that's about 2 years ago. It takes us to. And since we've just grown like crazy, our own portfolio, and we've managed for others. And now we're up to 75. We're adding 4 units today. So what does that take us to? 79 properties and 2 hotels. So It's pretty fun. It's a busy life, but it's good. The growth has been awesome.
And I know how we met was, through Alec, and it was helping him actually buy a hotel.
Yep.
So let's talk about the 2 hotels that you currently run. Are those actively?
Hey, one of them, Alex, which is a Springville hotel. You guys all have to come when we open. Is not. And then the other one is. So the other one's up in Ogden, just launched. And that one is honestly kind of turning a little bit more into a retreat space. It's small. There's 11 rooms, but there's this big great room. And we've had just a ton of interest for people like getting married who want to house their whole family in the same place, be able to have a nice dinner there too. And then retreats. So like mentors coaching in Utah who are like, yep, I just want to throw a retreat. I want to do all the food, all the, learning experiences, and I want to host it there so everyone can have their own space and room. So we actually think that one will end up more of a retreat space than it will like a true hotel.
Very cool.
Anyway.
And how do you guys determine that? How do you determine highest and best use when it comes to Airbnb?
Yeah. So just the cash flow. Well, I'm just all about the numbers. So as far as that goes, you are going to run into a little bit of restriction with the city on what they'll let you do. So let's say you could have like 6 studios on your property and rent them all out on Airbnb or as short-term rentals or corporate housing. The city might not be so okay with that.
Yeah.
Maybe an on conforming duplex, maybe a single house, but there's lots of things that we can do to, and some of these are directly related to short-term rentals and some are not, to maximize that cash flow. So if you have extra storage, we rent it out on Neighbor. If you have an extra RV pad, we love renting those out on Neighbor too, to put somebody else's RV there. So those are other ways you can kind of, and that's just like a quick snapshot of that, but ways to maximize cash flow on your whole property. As far as if you should rent it out short-term or 30-day rentals on corporate housing, kind of the hierarchy of all of that is short-term rentals is pretty much going to make you the most anywhere. Second to that, it's going to be 30-day rentals or midterm stays, corporate housing. All of those are kind of in the same bracket. And those are just a little bit longer stays, but they're furnished rentals. They're just like somewhere you would stay for the weekend, but the stays are a little bit longer. And then after that, your longer term, so 6-month plus furnished stays, those make a little bit less than the shorter ones just because they're a little bit closer to long-term numbers. So those are kind of like your different levels. And then things that we don't do as a company, but you can do: student housing, rent by room, even like Airbnb by room. That makes the very most. So if you're ever really thinking about it, whatever sounds hardest, you're probably going to make the most money.
Yeah.
Because you're adding that additional value. So coordinating, 6 bedrooms at the airport of different guests in every bedroom, that's hardest. So you're probably going to make the most that way if you're looking for a rule of thumb.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. Ultimately, whatever's going to require the most work is what's going to produce the highest results when it comes to the time frames and everything there. I mean, and there's just so much that we can talk about.
Just dive in. What do you want to know? Let's start with the juicy stuff.
So let's just jump right into numbers, right?
Yeah.
And let's address what I was talking about there. So here were the numbers when I was analyzing Airbnb compared to rental buy and hold. Buy and hold is really, my comfort place. It's something I know pretty well. We know how to add value. We know how to increase rents. We know that very, very well. Okay. But what my issue was is, as I was looking around, I said, hey, I'll just use an average one. I was like, average 2-bed, 1-bath here in, Orem, for example, you can probably get around $1,000 a month, do something like that. And then on Airbnb, I was like, those are renting, about 60, 70. And I ran these numbers about 2-3 years ago. So they've probably changed a bit since then. But I was like, even if you're at, let's say $70 a night on like what your true Airbnb is, and we can talk a lot about your maintenance fee, the taxes that get charged into it. I was like, let's say you can actually keep, say, $70 of that. I was like, if in a perfect world, you rent it for 30 days and, you make twice as much, and it was great. Or the 70 times 30, 2,100. But I was like, in most cases, that's not what was happening. It was most places they had their occupancy rates were, below 50, so most of them were around 40. So,
okay. Can I ask you where you're finding those?
Yes. This wasn't, again, this was 3 years ago. Yeah. And I was just running average numbers.
So you're just looking on Airbnb at their calendar and you're saying they're full half the time?
No. I looked at quite a few sites. I don't remember exactly which one. Data sites. Got it. It was stating, I don't remember if I looked up Orem or Utah County. Again, this was a couple years ago. Yeah. But they said the average occupancy rates, they gave me average numbers. So it wasn't a per property thing. Yeah. It was just on average.
So I want to use this as an example because it's a huge misnomer when people are looking into it and they're like, nobody makes money. Okay. So when you go to rent a car, if you've ever done that, foreign country, US, whatever, they're like, it's $50 a day. And then you actually finish checking out and then you divide it by your number of days and you're like, that's like $100 a day, right? Yeah. It's marketing, right? It's how it's all set up. So if you're just looking on Airbnb or even some of the data sites, it's just not going to give you a good idea. And it's just not grown enough as an industry where there's a lot of really reliable places where you can go plug in your address at Rentometer or something like that. Rentometer, I can't remember how to pronounce it, for long term. There's just not that built out for short term yet. So if you have somebody who's listed on one of the platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, but they only rent it out when they're on vacation, it looks like they're not booked 90% of the time. Yeah. But really, it's not even available for rent. And the data currently available can't sort for all of that right now. So it's going to look like you're not making any money. And if you go on, in Salt Lake and you're like, there's places renting for $30, $50 a night in Salt Lake. And you're like, and people are making money, that's less than long-term, even times 30. It's because there's other fees. There's other places they're making money. So it's true. It means their marketing is really good. But if you're just looking, it's going to look like you're not going to make anything.
Let's unpack that. because you talked a lot. I mean, wow. So one, bottom line, that was sort of what I was seeing. And I was like, on an average scenario, it's not playing out as well. So let's talk about why I was wrong.
Hey, let's do it.
So let's jump right into that. I mean, tell me about, I guess, one, what those fees look like typically, how you're able to maximize it more than, your marketing. Here's what your daily cost is and how much of that an owner actually gets to keep. And then two, let's talk about how you guys get your occupancy rates so darn low.
Okay, so let's cover a couple of vocab terms, if that's okay for the people at home, if you will. ADR, I might say that's average daily rate. That's like a hotelier phrase or terminology vocabulary. So that's all of your income broken down, gross average daily rate that you're collecting. So that's all of your fees included, kind of all summed together. Occupancy is the number of nights where there's a paying guest in your property paying you. Sometimes it's calculated as vacancy, sometimes it's occupancy. We always like to stay on the positive, go occupancy. So the number one thing that I can explain to help understand that is going to be our pricing. So we use dynamic pricing a lot like airlines do. So if you're going to fly on a Tuesday, it's going to be cheaper than on a Saturday. That's why people fly on holidays, because it's cheaper. So we change our prices on every property every single day to adjust for demand. And that sounds like we're suddenly scientists. We have some software that helps us do that, but we also control that software. So any property that we manage, we have between 20 and 33 different classifications and modifications to the general pricing algorithm that we've custom built out for this area. For Salt Lake, every little bubble, every little city kind of has its own. And then we also adjust for the size of your property. So if that time last year, there was a really high spike in like neighborhood occupancy, so the Airbnb down the road was occupied for a higher price, or more so we use year-over-year rates, year-over-year occupancy, local events are all factored in. The snow for our ski properties, the snow year, how much snow we're getting is all factored in. We use a base software called Price Labs. If you're running your own unit, that's a great software to use. A little bit of a learning curve, but they'll let you actually hop on a call with one of the pricing engineers and you can ask all your questions, which is super awesome. But changing the price and having that variability is what allows us to get that crazy high occupancy. So our average portfolio occupancy is in the 90s, varies on the month between 90 and 95 is the highest we've ever hit. Hopefully we'll hit that again and over. Okay, so some rules that we use that kind of help is if we're getting closer to a day, that day is worth more to you booked, even at a lower price than it would be vacant, right? So let's say your average daily rate's like 70, but if you have like a Tuesday, a single Tuesday that's empty, there's a very low chance that that would get booked. But if we drop your price down to like 48, 45 bucks, something like that, there's a higher chance that it will get booked. And filling in all of those little gaps gives you an opportunity to make more money. A lot of people kind of have this like give and take on that and saying, oh, but if my property is occupied more of the time, there's going to be more damage and there's going to be more wear and tear on my property. And is it really worth it? And we do come up against an is it really worth it for your guest quality, right? So if you're renting somewhere for like 15 bucks a night, like your guest quality is going to be so bad. So there is a little bit of a border there, but you can usually see that if you're just looking, we have software that helps us see that, but if you're just kind of looking around on Airbnb, what's kind of the lower end properties, the properties that maybe a little bit uglier renting for, that's probably about your base for getting good guests. But we're not worried so much about that because we charge back on any damage. We track all of our guest items very well. So when our cleaners come in, they do inventory, make sure everything's all there. And if it is damaged, we can charge them for it. If you have a long-term tenant in for 2 years, does that deposit cover every bit of damage? Not always, right?
Not ever.
Not ever, right? Okay, so if somebody comes in, they stain a sheet and they bump a wall, the next guest that comes in expects it to look exactly like the photos that you took on day one, right after you remodeled it. So those things have to be fixed very quickly, usually that day, usually within 5 hours. Some smaller things we can kind of refresh every 6 months, once a year, like some paint, things like that. But if anything's damaged, like I'm just trying to think of real life examples. A measuring cup melted in the dishwasher because it got got stuck like underneath. That has to be switched out that day, which is another reason why we wanted management when we didn't have it all built out, is because you can't always coordinate all of that, especially if you're far away. So having management help is really good. Okay, I've just talked way too long. What other questions have come up during that?
Nothing, guys. That was absolute gold. I mean, we can take that video and sell it back for $1 million. But seriously, though, that's huge. I wish I could take it 5 hours and dissect every little piece of that, because it is. I mean, having a variable rate, understanding. I'm kind of a numbers person.
Okay, do you want to walk through an example?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I just real quick, I love this is all like an algorithm going on in my head. At what point does it make sense? At what point is this? At what point is that? And then just like little scales all along the way of how you guys have things structured is awesome. But yeah, let's talk some real numbers.
Okay, so we were talking about a 2-bedroom in Orem, so let's just do that. And this is actually that bank-owned property down the street that Aaron and I bought. Aaron and I still own it. It's great. Makes us a lot of money. We're going to walk through it. So do you want like purchase price rehab? Is that helpful?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let's jump into everything.
We bought it 4 years ago for $197. It's an up-down duplex. That's really cheap. I know, we got a steal. Put about 30 grand into it. Granted, we weren't paying labor because we did all the labor. So it's pretty much materials. We rehabbed the whole house. We moved a kitchen, which was very expensive. It has separate furnace, AC. It's pretty nice now. We were renting it out long term before we knew short term was a thing, and before we were brave enough to do it there, because we were thinking it was only like a St. George thing, right? And then we started learning more as well. So long-term rents, we had the basement. It's a tile basement, so we had an animal in there, and it was renting for $1,200. Upstairs was renting for $1,000 because we didn't have a pet in there, and that's kind of what we were getting with our long-term rents. Upstairs is the first one we converted into short-term rental, and our take home from that. So we act as owners in this situation. So I pay Homehavens, even though I own that company, to manage it. So I'm giving you kind of owner numbers. Like if you came to me, we make about $1,800 that we take home, and we pay a mortgage with that from the upstairs. And then from the basement's like a little funky. So this is going to go into we were just chatting before about, okay, what if a property isn't like tip top shape, brand new, remodeled, perfect? And it's not. It's a basement. It's a little bit funky because of the layout. It's tile everywhere. We have lots of rugs down. We definitely made it bright and cute, but it's not like a brand new build. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like a basement apartment. And so that one rents out. We actually keep our prices lower in order to hit guest expectations so we can still keep good reviews. But Aaron and I still walk with about $1,600 a month from that unit.
So $1,600 and $1,800.
$1,600 and $1,800. Each is a 2-1 in Orem, just north of UVU. We also have a garage, a second garage, and an RV pad that we rent out on Neighbor. RV pad makes $100 a month. I think it actually makes like 95, but for math's sake, we'll say it makes 100. Are you keeping my tally?
Yeah.
Okay, keep my tally for me. The second garage we rent for $80 a month, and that's just storage. We've had the same people have had their boxes in there for 3 years. And then the main one makes $110 a month. So what's our total?
So 18, 16, let's just call it 111, right?
Okay.
So 21 and then 16, 37. Like that's unreal. Like just to give, you probably know this, and to give other folks an idea. I just ran a comp for a future seller for fourplex in Utah County, about 100 years old, until over 100 years old actually. But it's a charming fourplex, and it's actually renting pretty well. They're two bed, 1 units, two 1 bed, 1 bath units. Bottom line, this unit is worth about $800 and change, and it's producing a little, right around $4,000 a month.
Okay.
So, you're at 37 for a 200, and, let's play it out and say you would have done the repairs done for you, and you're at 260 there, for the same return is, again, it's mind-boggling.
And ours is built in the late 70s. So as far as upkeep, that's a little bit easier than over 100-year-old house, which is nice too.
100%. So it's, anyway, that's all.
So that's an example of something you can do if you're really pushing, right? If you're renting that many spaces, like that's not common, but it shows you the numbers. We also have like those really tiny, like 2-1 old homes in Salt Lake that are making double long-term rents just because, and they don't have any additional storage or any other opportunities and they rent well that way. So that Orem one is a good example of somebody who's like really hustling. Like we did that, right? That was one of our first income producing properties. We're just like, how do we maximize this, right? But there's other ones that are a little bit more simple as far as everything going on at the property that still make, double long-term rents, which is awesome.
Yeah. And assuming you guys bought that, even FHA moved into it, your mortgage is probably, maybe $1,000 and change. Does that sound right?
Yeah. So our current payment on it, we actually have it in a first position HELOC. And so we kind of take funds in and out of that depending on what other investments we're working on. I think our current payment on it's like $750, $750. So yeah, they wouldn't let us buy it FHA though.
Yeah.
Because we were buying it bank owned and kind of wrecked. And anyway,
yeah.
I wish.
That's so cool. Oh man, we need to just keep going though. I wish I could take so much time on each one of those details and talk about it. But so let's talk about that. So an average unit, in your opinion, if you were to have, and I know this is kind of on a case-by-case basis, but if you were to have a property and you didn't have a ton of money for remodels, and it was just like a dated, 70s, 80s place, on average, are you seeing that those, even though dated, would perform equally well on Airbnb as opposed to long-term rental? Or what do you feel like the exchange is there? And again, talking about algorithms and scales and all that, at what point do you feel like the balance tips toward long-term rental? Is there a place where that exists, or what's your take on that?
Okay, I'm going to add another scale to your plate of scales here. So there's this balance once you're renting between guest reviews and income, right? So if your reviews aren't good, then your income will slowly follow that and will slowly drop as well. And it's actually very easy to drop to a point if you're consistently getting negative reviews. So Airbnb's rating scale specifically, VRBO is a little bit more lenient, but Airbnb you have between 1 and 5 stars if you're rating a property. At 4.3 stars, they boot you off the platform. Wow. So it's kind of a high bar to keep, right? Because you would think giving 4 stars is like, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but no big deal. But you get enough of those and like you're done. So as far as that goes, having older places is tough because of that balance, right? Typically guests coming expect remodeled in the last couple of years, maybe gray walls, definitely white walls, furnished well, newer fixtures, faucets, vanities, etc. And so when they go into a place, even if it's clean, that's older or outdated, it doesn't feel the same quality as the place they stayed in, their last night while they're on this trip. And so that makes it really tough to maintain reviews on properties that are a little bit older. That being said, there's other things you can do. So we actually have a property right now where I do love the owner. He's lots of fun, but he furnished it himself from DI, and we've since required him to replace some items, but it's just still kind of looks like an old man cave a little bit. But it's doing great as a 30-day rental, right? Somebody who's selling their house in this crazy market, who has a month or two gap before they can get into the new house that they bought, and they just want something economic that's already furnished, already done. They can stay in, no frills, no hassle for a couple of months. And that makes about time and a half long term. So I would say if you're looking at a place and it's not fairly updated, probably not going to be a good fit for short-term rental, somebody staying for a couple of days kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that you can't potentially make more money on it by using a different strategy.
Of course.
Hard answer, huh?
No. I mean, it's, again, there's in my mind, I'm like, great clip. You're probably going to be all over my social media.
That's okay. I'll take it.
They're going to forget about me and just be like, all right, let's just jump into Lauren. Very, very cool. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm in my mind. I know I need to keep moving, but I want to keep analyzing those other things. So jumping right back into it, let's talk reviews. Yeah, I mean, let's talk reviews. You obviously talked about the importance of it. Let's talk about how you guys go about getting great reviews and what the balance is. Again, I know we're talking about a lot of skills, but between, if your property is not the absolute nicest, let's talk about setting the right expectation and what met expectations look like. Let's hear you unpack all that.
Okay, so when you go on, and we'll talk about Airbnb specifically, there's a handful of listing platforms that we use, but Airbnb is very popular. And for the most part in Utah, most of the bookings come from Airbnb for most people. So the first thing you see is the photos. And this is going to be a question from everyone, right? Do you take professional photos? Do you not? You should always take professional photos, but you should never Photoshop anything other than lighting. So we shoot on a 20mm lens, which is not quite like a fisheye lens, but it allows you to see more of the room. That's fairly common for real estate. Really, you want to just include, so your photos want to look awesome. And then in the review, the listing description, that's where you want to be really honest, just to make sure all expectations are met when the guest arrives. So if you're taking pictures and you're like looking back through the pictures and you're like, these are looking a little bit nicer than maybe the property is, or looking a little bit bigger because of the angles you had to take and it's a smaller, like include the square footage. And so basically the listing description, you want to include every caveat where if a guest came back and is like, hey, like we just checked in, but we're a little bit disappointed. It doesn't look quite as big as the pictures. You just say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We try to be as honest as possible. Listing description says the rooms are a little bit smaller and the square footage and the age of the home and that spring brings box elder bugs in Utah. Like you just want to be as honest as possible in the description, but you want the photos to look good because without the photos are like your gateway. If that photo on the where you have all of your photos stacked against everybody else's, if yours doesn't look the best, they won't click in and they won't book your property. But you want to be completely honest that when they're looking further into it, they know exactly what they're getting. So that's your photos versus balance kind of with the words.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. Well, I have one of my last questions because unfortunately I don't want to take up your whole morning. But let's talk about the future of Airbnb. This is something that I have my thoughts and potential concerns there. But what are your thoughts on cities coming in and stating, hey, we're not allowing short-term rentals, for example. And I think there are some short-term rentals here, and I'm not sure how active they're enforcing it. But like Vineyard, for example, I believe is a city they've come in and stated like, hey, we're not big fans of short-term rentals. Yeah. Some HOAs have brought in new covenants and restrictions to come in their CC&R saying, hey, we don't want short-term rentals. What are your thoughts since it's your niche? I mean, you've spent a lot of time on this. I'm sure this is something you guys have thought of or at least have an opinion on. What is your opinion of the future there and what you think, regulations and restrictions might end up doing there?
Yeah, that's a huge question. Now you're making me unpack the big questions. Okay, so the first one was just restrictions and zoning, and I will touch on that briefly. If you're looking into an area in a property, your order to check down is country, right? Country allows, that's great. State allows, that's great. And then you either go to county or city. Depending on your area, there are either restrictions at the county level or at the city level. Salt Lake and Utah County have said allowed at the county level. The cities are allowed to make restrictions. And then the cities can choose to create like a permitting process, however they would like to do that. Below that is your HOA. And I would never, ever, ever suggest going against an HOA. It's the number one way to get caught. Like it's just, you're not going to be successful that way. So just don't, in my opinion. And then below that, whether you think about it or not, is your neighbors. Because even if you're licensed and everything is done perfectly, legally, ethically, everything, if your neighbors hate what you're doing and they're going to talk to the guests about it or do anything like that, like it might not be a great rental. And that's something that's kind of hard for some people to swallow, that if your neighbors absolutely hate what you're doing, even if you're doing everything right, it might not work out there. So all of those down. And this is why I love suggesting Airbnb as like an additional cash flow strategy, as opposed to like the only way that the deal works. This should be a bonus as opposed to like the only way that you can make this property work for you. So that's kind of my like super quick on restrictions there. As far as the future of it, we are providing value, right? Everyone who's hosting this kind of housing is providing value that is clearly needed. And so if there's a market need for it, I think there'll always be a place for it. The market has shown that there's definitely a need for short-term furnished housing. So if Airbnb as a company goes away, if cities limit in specific areas or zonings, like it'll just move over a block. The concept is here to stay because the market support has been, Airbnb as a company is the largest hospitality company in the world and has grown that way very, very quickly. It's not going away as an idea. area. And then the other fear that people talk to me about all the time is oversaturation, right? What if everyone starts doing this? Is there really demand for that? And this is kind of something interesting that in your position, you might not know this. If you go on Airbnb right now in any area in the US, for the most part, half of those listings will not be there this time next year. So the turnover on individual homes is extremely high. I think most of that is host burnout. So if you're renting the place yourself, suddenly you're the cleaner, you're the maintenance man, you're on call 24/7, you can't go on vacation. Like, it's demanding if you're not able to build out, help companies, whatever, to help you. And so host burnout is a real, and then also that additional cash flow. It's like, I don't know if you've had this experience or not, but I have. In college towns, if you rent your apartment for super cheap, you typically can't keep your tenants very long because it's cheap enough for them to like save and go to other things. So if you're making all this additional cash flow, people are very eager to roll it over into what their dream really is, right? And so if their dream really is something else, or if they want a bigger, badder project, or they see another opportunity, they're also, if they're even investor types, are more likely to sell and move through properties quicker with the strategy.
Very cool.
Okay.
No, honestly, great answer. You stole my last question, which was, supply and demand. What does that look like? Where is it going? With your clients, and I'm curious, and feel free to answer this as you will, but how many of them are you seeing start on the Airbnb path and get it established and then stop?
I've never lost a client. So every unit that we've picked up as a company, I still have. So not for me specifically. I think my own portfolio is the only one that I really thought about rolling, because typically we're the highest performing asset in the clients that we manage for. And so they're like not ready to get rid of that one first. They're ready to get rid of a different one and roll it into that. But I'm different in that way, in that my average owner owns 3 to 4 properties with us under management, whereas other management companies like onesie twosies, you might see that turn a little bit more.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I think you have created a very cool niche, because what you're doing is working with investors. They care a lot more about the numbers.
Yep.
They care a lot less about, there's just an emotional thing about renting at your house.
Yeah.
And your home and what maybe was your home or anything like that. And like your space. I think there's a full other category that we could spend hours talking about, the emotional side there.
Yeah.
So with investors, you come in and you're producing this, and if you're producing at a higher cash on cash return than what I can do on my long-term rentals, then like, why wouldn't I do it? Like, and then why would I change? Unless I have a higher producing asset that I can roll into something else, then I wouldn't roll it over. And the problem is,
well, this is something I should tell you. We have seen properties roll over within our portfolio, but they stay in our portfolio. So that investor sells and they say, yep, we're selling it with the financials in place. This is what it's making. Maybe they even sell it for a little bit more because of the cash that it's making. But at that point, the new buyer isn't ready to be like, okay, we got an operating business. Let's just clear everyone out. I want to take this on myself. Like, nobody does that. Mm-hmm. So they just keep it with us. So that's why we've never lost a property.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which again is what I'm saying is you perform well, your assets do well. One of my first exposures to it was a guy was renting out his property as an Airbnb in Pleasant Grove.
Okay.
And this is residential real estate.
Yeah.
And I was like, brother, based off of comps, like, you're at 500, like that's your tippy top. He's like, I want 625. And I was like, because my property is performing, as an investment property around the 625 mark, which I agreed with him. And as a straight investment, that made sense. But as an appraised value, especially where it was fully residential, an appraiser is going to go in there and say, even though you are producing at this rate, I can't justify even close to your value there, because they use the comparative approach when it comes to residential real estate. Yep. So again, I think just another reason why you just keep it, and if it's working, let it keep working.
Yep.
But anyway, well, thank you so much, Lauren. One day we'll take 24 hours and just just go over everything, and I think I'd understand maybe 1% of what you know. So do you have any like closing remarks, or any like, hey, here's my overall take on Airbnb, or here's a couple things that I'd watch out for, or anything else you'd like to share with the audience to finish out?
It's, I don't know, kind of meta, right? Just don't close your mind to kind of anything. There's a lot of investors that have done things the same way for a long time, and there's a lot of content out there that's kind of been the same for a long time, value adds and flips. And so when you see something new come in, like short-term rentals, just learn learn more about it, because it might not be for you. It might be for you. But if you can stay young in the investing world, I guess, if you can watch the changes happen, whether that's student housing or developments or short-term rentals, everyone that I've seen do that has really come out on top. And I have the privilege of playing with some pretty big players in the space, and those who are just see a new idea and say, okay, cool, let's really dig into that, instead of being like, that's going to go away or it's not going to stick around. Like, why is it there? Why did it come up in the first place? So addressing those market needs is just that's the incredible opportunity. And whether that's Airbnb right now, or if that's corporate housing in the future, as it changes, or because we will see changes. I know that as far as cities change their legislature and kind of get behind some of these things, just stick with it and ask why it's there, because we're kind of at the forefront of some new marketing ideas and they're there for a reason. So I think you'll stay on top financially if you stay on top of the information in the market there too.
Well, thank you so much. I actually have one other quick follow-up question, because the concept intrigued me. Are you familiar with the ledges in St. George?
Yeah.
Cool. So I just stayed there about 2 weeks ago. One of my friends owns a unit there, and they just manage it all for him.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know what the ledges is, long story short, it's essentially this whole subdivision that was designed as an Airbnb concept, where, their primary target was people who wanted an Airbnb property in St. George. So really cool amenities, pickleball court, what else matters? But they had 2 pools, really, really nice housing, could fit lots of people, but the lots are pretty darn small and they're all pretty close together. But what's your take on that, and on seeing that as a concept of people creating, full subdivisions specifically on Airbnb?
That's the reason I was in Kanab yesterday. So I'm very much supportive of that, behind that. If there's a lot of people that want neighborhoods to remain neighborhoods where they know their neighbors, they're not changing every day, but there's this huge demand for vacation rental homes. And so why not put those all in the same spot and put kind of all the neighbors that want to be neighbors in the same spot? I think that makes perfect sense to me. So the developers that are creating that is awesome. St. George and Park City are kind of their own little world when it comes to this. As far as management companies, just vary widely. You can be anywhere from 15% to 45% management fees in Utah, and they're structured all different ways. So there's not really a good way to compare all of them, even within St. George. Like, I have a chart when people ask me about different subdivisions in St. George, where I'm looking at, okay, do they allow outside management? What fee are they at? Do they own the land? Like, it's just all so different. So I guess my plug there is just ask. We're open books. Email me. I can run projections on any specific property. We've talked a lot about data today, and it's all very complicated. So if you need a simple explanation, like, just reach out. Whether we end up managing or not, we're always happy to provide value and resources in a world that's changing so quickly.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, again, I thank you so much. I'm excited to watch. I'll be honest. Sorry, guys. I don't usually rewatch my videos, but this is one that I'm excited to rewatch over and over again, and just, continue to glean new knowledge and see how much I missed while we were here. But thanks again so much for coming by.
Thank you.
And we'll have to bring you on again.
Okay. I'm happy to come again.
Perfect. All right. Thanks again, guys. Again, that's Lauren with Haven. Again, guys, that's Lauren with Homehavens, Airbnb company, short-term rental company. Absolutely awesome. I recommend you guys watch this whole video. It is worth every second, except for the parts I was in it. So again, thank you so much and have a good one.